It is literally thousands of years of, being raised. This is the way you're supposed to be. This is the way that men are supposed to be. This is the way that women are supposed to be. And nobody else is supposed to tell you any different.
All of these subsects of evangelical Christianity that have worked for years and years to keep women firmly under the thumb of men are going to find themselves in a real quandary.
It's always the same, is that the man is the head of the household and the priest of the home, and he takes lead in everything.
Cloistering them and making them feel dirty for doing things that are just normal in teenage life and dismissing the same behaviors in boys, that's where the real problems start, and that is a huge problem in evangelical circles.
Welcome to Unbound,
A podcast for new atheists
and lifetime atheists,
ex-evangelicals.
truth seekers, and free thinkers.
There is life after faith.
And life here is good. It's time for a new perspective.
And a better conversation. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle, and it's time to get unbound.
Well, here we are. It's only been 5 weeks.
Only 5.
5 weeks. Spider's been having a little bit of a time. I'm not even going to mince words here. There's been a lot. There's just been a lot. A lot of it has to do with just the way the world is right now, and some of it has to do with other things that have cropped up along the way that have stolen some time, that have redirected our attention, but mostly mine. And every week we discuss whether or not we're going to do an episode, and there just always seems to be something standing in the way.
Yeah.
But I'm trying really hard to get this thing back on track and pump out an episode every week the way that we were before.
Right.
Because it's not like we don't have anything to talk about. We got plenty to talk about, and a lot's happened in the world in the last 5 weeks. We're going to forgo the Christians behaving badly part of this because so much of what's been in the news has been related to other things that at this point it just seems appropriate to get back to doing what we do.
Yes.
And what we do well, and sticking to subjects that have to do with evangelical Christians and the happenings in the world that involve them. And tonight we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I am going to be taking the co-host seat, and I am going to immediately right now hand things over to your host, Shelle, who has some really, really good stuff for you, and I am not going to take any more of her time. I'm just going to hand it right over, and if I feel like interjecting something here and there, I will. But tonight you're going to hear from her, and some of you are out there saying, "Well, hallelujah, we hear from you enough." But this is her episode, and I'm just going to hand it right over. Take it.
Okay, thanks, Spider. I am kind of doing the companion piece to the last episode about toxic masculinity, because I believe, and I'm going to be talking about the patriarchy and how it affects females and how Christianity really does enforce that. It keeps that enforcement in place. And for a long time, I thought that patriarchy came with religion, but I'm learning that most of the people who study this have decided that it has come from other aspects of human development, because patriarchal society seems to be all over the world in almost every culture. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, men are way more likely than women to hold positions of power and to have economical power as well. And scientists are saying that it's because women marry into men's families, especially when our society became agricultural. Men started staying in one place and working their land and developing their homestead, and women would leave their family and go with their men. And that's been the case for a long time, especially in agricultural societies where they had to stay in one place. The women are leaving their support systems. They're leaving their other female relatives, making it so that they don't have as much support. Therefore, they don't have as much power as the man does, and that just seems to create a habit. And along the way, it just became more institutionalized.
Well, that tradition goes back pretty damn far. It goes back to the book of
Yes.
Genesis. And I'm sure that there are certain evangelicals that are listening right now that are just asking themselves, well, what's the problem here? Because this is what they're used to. For this cause, a man shall leave his mother, and a woman should leave her home and be cleaved to her husband.
Right. Which is kind of confusing. He's not leaving his home, but
He
he's
gets
leaving
someone
his
else to take
mother.
care of him. That's
Well,
what it
this
boils down to.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. In the early 80s, a preeminent female historian, Dr. Gerda Lerner, also said that it wasn't necessarily one sex domineering over the other. It was sort of a compromise that the sexes came to, because when the average age of female lifespan was under the age of 30 and infant mortality rates were like something like 75%, they had to be having and nursing children constantly just to keep things going. And therefore they needed a lot of protection. So that's another route that patriarchy could have come into human lives.
Well, some of them probably could have used some protection from the husbands that kept bedding them and making children with them and forcing their health into places where they were dying before they were 30.
Yeah, this is true, but infant mortality rates were like 75% because of one thing and another, and kids dying of preventable diseases that we have cures for.
Well, preventable then or preventable now?
Preventable now.
Well, yeah,
not
that's
then.
the thing.
Yeah, so they did have to keep having children. If they were going to even have children to help them work whatever land they had. But, and I thought that was interesting when I was going through my research. The idea that it started before religion really had a foothold in it was interesting to me. And it makes more sense that now most of the Western religions have patriarchal structures. Even back in Greece and Rome, and all of those structures, even in China and Japan, they also have patriarchal structures.
Yeah, when you look into the Greek pantheon, though, there were a lot of goddesses that had a lot to say, and
Yes.
they had a lot to say to the higher deities like Zeus.
Right.
They had their own voice. They challenged the other gods' authority all the
Yes.
time.
Yes, but we didn't have that leavening in Christianity, at least not a terrible lot.
No, because when you don't have deities fighting with each other and there's just one in charge and it happens to be male, then that's where all of this stuff starts to get skewed.
Yes, but with the rise of Christianity, actually, when the Canaanites first started being more towards the Judaism side of things, because when God first appeared on the scene, he was not seen as male or female. He had qualities of both genders. And before Hebrew was a thing, he also had an androgynous pronoun.
Well, the Hebrew Yahweh comes from a Canaanite deity of the same name.
Right.
He was based on a much older deity from a much older culture. And there are marked differences between the Canaanite Yahweh and the Hebrew Yahweh, because the Hebrew Yahweh is more of the patriarchal figure because of reasons that you just said.
Right.
In a lot of ancient pantheons, you see the gods and goddesses more on equal footing.
Right.
But when you are dealing with a structure that only has one male deity,
Right.
that's where you're going to start seeing all of this stuff starting to shift from one, just from the middle all the way over to one side, where now the guys are all in charge.
Right. And while modern day Judaism, at least not the ultra Orthodox kind, modern day Judaism has more equity between the sexes. The Christians have been way lax, way more lax in including women.
Now, when you're talking about equity,
Right.
now I know of plenty of Jewish women that still cut their hair way short and have to wear wigs in public.
Well,
because...
yeah, that's why I said, aside from the ultra-Orthodox Jews, they vaccinate their children and all of that wonderful things.
Yep.
You know, they live in modern culture, they speak modern English or whatever.
A lot of them take their cues from their husbands in public, but have a lot more to say and a lot more of a voice at home.
Right, but that's their purview. That's where they rule, that's traditionally their sphere of influence.
Right.
They're there to maintain the social norms, but not having any power or any say in anything else.
Yeah.
Regarding their lives, they can't just forego the wig. They
No.
can't wear things that show their skin at all. They're all buttoned up to the wrist and down to the ankles. And
How much of that do you think is spousal influence and how much of it is just devotion to their religion?
it depends on the woman. But you also have to figure that it is literally thousands of years of, being raised. This is the way you're supposed to be. This is the way that men are supposed to be. This is the way that women are supposed to be. And nobody else is supposed to tell you any different.
Tradition.
Tradition.
There you go.
Tradition is just peer pressure from dead people.
Oh, goodness.
Is
Okay,
it-
yeah, I never thought about it that way before, but I don't think I will ever think of it any other way again, so thank you for that.
Well, I hope, I thought it would be appreciated, especially as we're talking about this, because I think that patriarchy really does become tradition, and it is tradition in America especially. And we don't like to think about that because we have had the feminist wave at least 3 times, and it doesn't seem to take. It has maybe a 20 years or so where people are very focused on trying to get equality between the sexes, or however many sexes there are, and they're trying to do that.
There's
and,
2 sexes, there's a lot of genders.
Yes, true. But people have been striving for equality for a long time. But in the late 80s, it just sort of fizzled out. And in the 90s, nobody was really talking about it. It's become more of a thing, especially since 2016.
Oh, yeah.
Because we realize that we cannot take anything for granted.
Society is putting up with a lot less of a lot of things over the past few years. I've noticed that there have been a lot of voices
Yeah.
on a lot of issues, and women's issues not being by any means the smallest one of those.
Right.
And I mean, we had the Me Too movement. We've had all kinds of sexual predators being exposed for what they do.
Right.
I still don't know how much to believe based only on what comes out of the media, but I also understand that when it's one person making an accusation, there are questions. When it's 30 people making an accusation, something is going on.
Right. Or it should be understood something is going on and it should be stopped.
Right. But then there are people like Jeffrey Epstein who get away with stuff
For decades.
Yeah, literally decades before anyone
Weinstein.
comes forward.
And Weinstein.
Oh, yeah, Harvey Weinstein. Yep.
But everybody knew about it. That's the funny part. I would hear jokes about it all the time. I didn't know who Harvey Weinstein was. I just knew he seemed like a schmuck.
Big time.
Yeah. And so I didn't know who he was, but I was hearing, when comedians would talk amongst each other, they would make jokes about his parties. And, it was understood. Everybody knew, but nobody would do anything.
Yeah, it amazes me how much, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for here, but there's, I don't know, is the word complicit?
Yeah,
Was there
complicity.
complicity with a lot of the stuff that happened? Mostly because there were probably very few people involved or who heard things or witnessed things that had clean hands themselves.
Right.
So I think that a lot of it had to do with the fact that there were people out there that were doing a lot of the same things, probably not in the same volume of infractions, but had been involved in just enough to be able to not be able to point fingers. They don't feel like they can point fingers because they've been involved in some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. So for personal reasons and also for career-based reasons,
right.
because, you tell on me, I tell on you.
Right.
It could just snowball all over the place. So I could definitely see people wanting to protect their livelihoods and their reputations by keeping quiet when they saw stuff going on.
Right. It's like a whack-a-mole game. The one who sticks his head up is going to get whacked. So people say, okay, it's time to not do this. I can't do this because I'm risking my career. And I gave up these things in order to have it.
And that applies to a lot of the victims, too.
Right. Yes, it applies to people of all kinds, both sexes. But going back to religion, the Old Testament contains some of the worst examples of bias against women.
Oh, of course.
Just the fact that women are punished, are said to be unclean because of something they cannot control. Their menstruation, they cannot control that.
Right. They spend half their lives unclean because you've
Right.
got the week that you're on your period and the week after your period.
And then you have sex, and then aren't you unclean for that? I can't remember.
I don't know about sexual intercourse because that's kind of necessary.
Yeah, it is. But I also, but you're unclean after you have a child.
Oh, yeah.
And which sex the child is.
You're unclean
determines.
twice as long if you have a daughter as opposed to a son. It's
Right.
crazy.
China has this problem because remember the one-child policy? And a lot of people were basically leaving their daughters to die and only keeping their sons. And now there's like a complete imbalance where there's not enough women. And these guys are committing suicide because they can't find anybody to love.
It's another one of those dual issues like
Right.
with toxic masculinity.
Right.
It's not an evangelical only problem. It's a huge society problem, and it's a global problem.
Right.
It's just that when you start involving bad doctrine, it just exacerbates it to the
Right.
point where now it's more visible, and the brainwashing that's involved with it. Just like what I was talking about with the toxic masculinity episode, where you can bring up what's wrong with a lot of this stuff, and the ones that are being victimized, that would be mostly the women, are going to be the first ones to defend it in a lot
Right.
of circles.
Because it is part of their tradition, and people are scared to go against tradition. People are afraid to think for themselves. I know that was a problem with me,
Right.
and
It's a
I
problem
wasn't
with a lot of women,
Yeah,
evangelical women in particular.
right. It's like you're safe in this little bubble that you have, and if nothing disturbs that little bubble and you're happy, you don't want to go outside that. You're scared. You don't want to have to deal with this and make decisions. And it's not bad to not want to deal with it. It's just kind of a loss.
I don't know. Is it as much that you don't want to deal with it, or you don't want to deal with the scrutiny that's going to come with it?
Right. It's both. It's hard decisions. You have to make hard decisions when you think and live for yourself and make your own decisions. And don't just say, okay, I'll be a stay-at-home mom and never leave the house or never leave this particular family that I'm in. But, it's hard for women who've been raised that way for generations to try and break that mold.
Right. I mean, you're taught something from the time that you can understand it, and that in and of itself just makes it right.
Yeah, and that's what you're comfortable with, so it feels right to you.
Right.
And you have everybody saying that it's right. Every man in your life is telling you that it's right, and a lot of the women.
Oh yeah, it amazes me what a lot of evangelical women not only put up with, but what they defend.
Right.
And some of them have home situations that are they're downright scary.
Yeah.
Downright scary. Some of the things that they go through, some of the attitudes that their husbands have toward them. I know that there are a lot of evangelical women out there that they consider it their duty and their pleasure to have as many kids as they can have.
Oh, I'm going to talk
to
about
fill that
later.
quiver.
I mean, patriarchy, especially within religion, it also promotes ignorance of basically women's issues because you don't want to explore those. Up until fairly recently, women died of heart attacks all the time because they didn't know that women were having heart attacks because it presents much differently in females than in men. Like men will get the numbness in the left arm and start having chest pains, but women will sometimes get jaw pain.
Right.
Or backaches.
Yeah.
And other things like that. I know that when my mom had her heart attack, she thought it was her wisdom teeth.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because
That jaw pain, like when you've got really bad sinus pressure.
and she had them out. And then later on, she figured out she had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And she didn't know until they said, oh, you've had a heart attack recently.
Yeah.
And then she
yeah,
was in the
I
hospital.
remember that. I remember
Yeah.
that really well. And there are a lot of men out there who don't understand 9/10 of what women go through, what their bodies do.
Right.
They know well enough to be able to make babies, and that's all they know.
Right.
And I mean, just I'm thinking back just a few years, one of the arguments that one of these idiot politicians had about abortion was that if a woman was raped, that she could just shut the process down of getting pregnant in the first place or
Right.
delivering that child. Their bodies have a way of shutting that stuff down, I think is what he said.
No, the women just told you that. I mean, I'm sure that there have been women who have been raped, and because their husbands or the men in their life would not approve for religious reasons, they have gone and had an abortion anyway.
Well, probably.
Probably because, I mean, boy, don't we wish we could shut that down and turn it on at will.
I know, right?
I mean, wouldn't I love that? That would have been great. I mean,
Yeah, when you're ready to have a kid, then you can just start your period up. If
Yeah.
you don't want to get pregnant, then why on earth do you need birth control? Just shut that stuff down.
right. But if all of your information is coming from the Bible, then you'll believe like the medieval church believed, and women must cover your ears because they are sexual organs.
Yeah. Oh, there was so much of that.
Yes, there was so
of
much
that.
nonsense.
And then we wonder why children and even teenagers who are already hitting puberty don't quite understand what all these processes are.
Right.
I did not understand how these processes worked, and I remember I had made some kind of a comment in front of my mother that alerted her to the fact that we kind of needed to have the talk. The talk, let me just go on record, the talk that I had with my mother was very ineffective. I knew nothing
Yeah.
at the end of that, and learned a lot of what I know about human sexuality pretty much on my own.
right.
And not through some of the best channels either,
No.
because a lot of young people, and it's getting younger with the advent. Jesus, the internet's been around for how long?
Lots.
With the aid of online resources that you can go to a porn site and just click a button that says yes, I'm 21. They're not going to know that you're 12.
Yeah, right.
And some of the stuff that is out there presents such a caricaturish picture of what sexuality is, then I think that there are a lot of people out there that remain ignorant to a lot of the realities of sex for a long time. Even after they've been having sex for a while, they're
Right.
ignorant to a lot of those realities.
Right. There's also, there is a lot of women who have long-standing health problems. But because they're women and they're overweight, doctors will just say, hey, just lose weight.
Yeah.
If you have Guillain-Barré disease, that's not going to help you. In fact, it'll be harder to lose weight because you have it. Or, chronic fatigue. Losing weight is not going to help chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yep.
And-
And these are all examples of how society feeds this monster.
Right.
And I've seen and I've experienced where women's health issues, like with even thinking about certain things with my mother, things that were minimalized that probably should have been looked at a little bit more closely.
Right.
And I mean, if I had a reaction to a bug bite, I was in the doctor's office and they were doing all kinds of things and figuring out whether or not I was going to need allergy shots.
Right.
But, it's amazing to me how health issues in women can go unaddressed to the point where they create more issues and sometimes life-threatening issues
Yes.
because they're just not taken seriously.
Right. But there have been, cases of women who just go doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, male and female, because they're not doing the research. The scientists are not doing the research on women's bodies. Historically, all of the drug tests have been on men. Historically, nobody has figured out that, maybe women shouldn't take this. Until recently, things have started to come out.
Right.
Like when did they actually discover the clitoris? I mean, it was like within the last 50 years, something like that. It was ridiculous. and they're
I don't know about the
realizing,
last 50 years, but I mean, it took us 5,000 years to figure out precisely how babies were made.
yes,
So,
yes, I think that people haven't want to explore it too much.
right.
You know, we keep that a mystery because that's something God does.
Well, because the vast majority of the reason why the clitoris is there in the first place is for female pleasure during sex. That's it's not something that anyone really worries that much about.
No.
I mean, I've seen more jokes and memes that poke fun at the notion of a woman actually wanting to have an orgasm, and that this is in the year 2020.
Yes.
It amazes me how people, men and women, still minimalize this and make
Yeah.
jokes about it when it's like, okay, you know, there are two people involved in this act. Shouldn't they both be able to enjoy it and enjoy it as
Yeah.
much as possible? And I also, though, don't really, I'm not crazy about the running joke about men not being able to find the clit.
Yeah.
Because most of us understand at this point, the vast majority of us understand, it's a matter of how much effort do you really want to put in
Yeah.
to her pleasure. Female pleasure during sex is still the subject of jokes and not real, honest, open, and serious conversation. Because if it's true what a lot of women say about how men approach sex, then there's a lot of men out there that need an education.
Oh,
and
probably.
not just on where the clit is, on a lot of different things, on a lot of different subtopics
Yeah.
that relate directly to this one. Does a man have a responsibility to make sure that his partner has an orgasm? I don't think so. But at the same time, it would be nice to think that you were at least thinking as much about your partner as you're
Right.
thinking about yourself.
Right.
Because it's not always going to happen. Sex isn't just about achieving an orgasm. But it would be nice if that was at least in the back of your mind, that there's another person involved in this and that maybe she would like to have as much fun as you're having.
Yeah, that would be nice, right?
Oh, yeah.
The interesting thing is that patriarchy is kind of like that word used to kind of be like the purvey of like, oh, that's just a feminist word for men ruling everything. And it is, but it's also, it's much more systematic. Right
predates
now
that.
we have institutionalized patriarchy.
It predates feminism by quite a bit.
Oh,
I'm just putting that out there.
Well, I'm talking about the word.
Yeah.
You know, in common usage. Today, people are much more able to call it out, talk about what it is, and it's about feminism's rise recently in recent cultures, in recent years. That's what I meant. I think that everyone needs feminism, especially men, because it helps everyone. It's supposed to help everyone. There are radicals that don't believe that men and women are equal. They want superiority of women over men, which is just as bad, just differently bad.
And, you know, there are a lot of men out there who, if you were to just walk up to them on the street and ask them to define feminism,
Right.
they wouldn't be able to piece together two sentences on what that word means. So I'm not going to comment on this because I'm not a woman. So why don't
But
you give us?
I am.
Well, there you go. So why don't you give us just, you know, the elevator pitch for what feminism is, and maybe a couple of points on what it isn't.
Right. Well, feminism isn't the idea that women are better than men. It's not about making women superior or anything like that. It's about making men and women equal. It's for women to reach their true potential
Right.
and for men to also reach their full potential.
And for everyone to cooperate with
Right.
everyone reaching their full
Awesome.
potential.
That's what it is. You know, women are much better at making alliances and cooperating with each other in mature society, because sometimes I feel like, okay, why are you fighting over this guy? You know, there have been certain like things, you know, like in high school, that
Oh, yeah.
type of thing. It's like, why are you fighting over
Yeah,
this
but men
dude?
fight over women too.
Yes, and that's like a kind of an immature version of male-female relationships where you fight. And it's like, no, there are people for everyone. I remember when Liam was little, when our son was little, and you would take him to the pediatrician's office.
Right.
What did they say to you? Asking where I was.
Oh yeah, they were very interested in why it was me doing all of this stuff. And I can recall most of the mail coming in your name, even though they had never seen you.
Yes,
the mail was always addressed to you, and that was true with the school system too.
Yes, it was.
Not just the doctor's offices. The school system did the same thing.
Yes.
And I was the one that made all the phone calls and sent all the emails and all of that. But because I was a little bit of a bug in their ear about a lot of things, I think that some of them just didn't want to deal with me. So they would send the correspondence to you, or they would email you on the subjects that I had emailed them on. And every piece of mail that came into that house had your name on it, and mine was nowhere to be found.
Yes. That's part of what feminism is trying to fix. If you're making all of the contacts and doing all of the outside the house child care, who knows what it's like inside the house, but if you are the one in front of someone asking for help for your child, you should be the one who gets the mail. You should be the one who gets the call. They should deal with you, because men can be child carers too.
Well, that's true. But I mean, like I said, this is far from just an evangelical problem.
No.
And society still looks at the father as the one who's out earning the living and bringing in the money, and mom is going to be the one who's going to be available for this stuff.
Right. And I'm like, I work full time.
And I worked full time, and we basically worked our schedules around all the stuff that needed to be done for him.
Right.
So it just so happened that I was more available at the times when he needed to see the doctor. I was always at all of the meetings at school, but I also made most of the phone calls, mostly because, with all due respect, you were very passive in a lot of areas where they just kind of needed a fire lit under their ass.
Yeah.
And that was where I came in and basically made sure that certain things happened for him, especially to the extent where there was a situation where he was being bullied in middle school. And I mean, the way that they dismissed me, I can only imagine the way that they would have dismissed you. And with me, I've never been the type to take "go fuck yourself" for an answer. So, but you would be more you would be more apt to basically take what they say and walk away with it.
Yeah,
I am more
that was
apt to
definitely
take
a
what they
problem.
say and just throw it back at them.
Yeah.
You know, just for the sake of example, when I went in to talk to the principal about that one instance, or not instance, with that one kid who was being abusive toward my son, they kept telling me, well, we can't give you any details because we have to protect this other kid. And I just sort of looked them square in the eye and I said, well, when does it become time to protect my kid? Okay, don't talk to me about protecting his assailant. Talk to me about what you are going to do to make sure that this behavior stops.
Yeah.
And you see, with you sitting there, they would have talked down to you. They would have placated you a little bit and assured you that they were taking care of the problem, and that would have been the end of it. You see, myself, I'm going to sit there. I'm going to say, okay, you're going to take care of the problem. Great. How? Mm-hmm. What's your plan?
Yes.
You know, I'm not going to just let them get away with, oh, we're going to deal with it. No, you're going to deal with it in a way that's appropriate and in a way in which I'm in the loop.
Yeah.
So these were a lot of the reasons, I think, why they didn't even want to bother with me, because they figured, okay, if we talk to mom's going to be a little bit more accepting of this. And, you know, it's more of that stereotypical little woman kind of mentality that still permeates every part of our culture.
Right. And especially evangelical culture. And, you know, I was raised with very much that mindset. When I was raised by myself, I kind of just said, okay, let's see, examples of functioning male-female relationships. I Love Lucy.
They slept in separate beds.
That was the style of the time. Let's see. Dick Van Dyke, you know, I'm like looking at other places for that. And it's all very, very patriarchal. and the little woman is just not good enough at doing this stuff.
Right. I'm not sure that the 1950s were a great place to look for
No,
examples
but
of functional male-female
it
relationships
was on
either.
television, and
Yeah.
that's my whole worldview is television at this point.
It's been that way in our culture for a very, very long
Right.
time.
Yeah, well, since the 50s, yeah.
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 Ever since people started pulling their TVs in front of the dinner table, Back to the Future. Now we can watch Jackie Gleason while we eat. Well, a lot of people started watching Jackie Gleason and a lot of other things. TV dinners and TV trays, so you didn't even have to go into the dining room anymore. You could just sit in your living room and always watch TV, always be indoctrinated to this is what American life is. And it really did paint a very idyllic picture that sort of made its way into the societal zeitgeist, because a lot of people look at the 50s as being an idyllic time for the American family when it was really anything but.
It was idyllic for white straight males.
Oh yeah.
And that's
And
it.
that was
That's
it.
it. Because women would just get committed.
Right.
And I remember they were talking about the beat poets. The beat poets, they're all male. And the reason why is because like a lot of those female beat poets who would have been beat poets were in the mental institution because they were a little too rebellious.
Yeah. And it wasn't even a matter of mental illness. It was a matter of you're not behaving yourself the way that you should.
You're not behaving like, June Cleaver. You're a rebellious woman.
Right.
And,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, then I saw a meme not long ago that outlined like 100 different mental diagnoses.
Yes.
Or mental issues.
Yeah,
that,
quote unquote.
right. That relate directly to women. And some of the stuff on that list was just absolutely batshit. And it wasn't that long ago.
No.
Comparatively speaking, it wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago.
We were talking earlier about the whole business of women continuously having babies and the Quiverful movement and all of that stuff. You had something you wanted to say about that.
Yeah, definitely. The Quiverful movement is an outgrowth of basically a cult within the evangelical Christian cult called, the Advanced Training Institute cult. It's Bill Gothard's Institute in Basic Life Principles, which is a homeschool curriculum that a lot of Quiverful families use.
Oh, we're going to be talking about homeschooling very, very soon on this show, too.
Yeah, but, they're very associated with the Duggar family. They teach a rigid hierarchy where God comes first, men come second, women are third, and children are at the very bottom for just, like, hierarchical purposes.
And woe betide you if you're a daughter.
Yes.
And not a son.
And you are flat, like, last if you're a daughter.
It's true.
Yes.
But you're also under more scrutiny. Even I mean,
so much scrutiny.
And that situation that I talked about, I think it was in episode 18 where we're talking about your life, your rules. And I was talking about how I was dating this girl and her parents were just so batshit crazy and drunk on the Kool-Aid that they wanted to have me arrested for a little bit of heavy petting that they found out about.
Yes.
And I could remember being in the hot seat, sitting there with her and her parents after the dust had settled, and everyone wanted to basically clear the air and make sure that there were certain things that were understood. I can remember her father sitting there and literally saying to me, our son has a little bit more freedom. We don't keep him on as tighter reins, but he's a boy. Well, maybe if you had a little bit more confidence in the decisions that your daughter was making and understood that she was her own person and had her own sense of autonomy as well, then it might be a little bit easier to trust her. Because when you say that you don't trust one of your kids, I'm sorry, but who raised that child?
Yeah.
So if you don't trust your kid, then I don't care whether it's a boy or a girl. If you don't trust your child, then you have yourself to answer to for that one. It has nothing to do with the kid. Because if that child grows up in an environment where she has parents who are approachable, who are open-minded about things like human sexuality, you don't really have to worry about tightening the reins on the girls, because the girls are growing up with a sense of self-respect that pretty much dictates that they're going to take care of their own shit when it
Right.
comes to anything related to growing up.
Right.
And that includes their relationships. Now, granted, there are a lot of women out there that get involved in abusive relationships and they stay there for a long, long time. But guess what? There are men that get involved in abusive relationships and stay with them for a long time. It happens.
Yes.
But at the same, just getting a little bit back on course, I sat there and listened to him say that. And my very first thought was, okay, so now you understand why she's dipping her toe in the lake here.
Yeah.
Because you're making it out like she can't make these decisions for herself. I mean, your son can decide where he puts his dick, but your daughter can't make the decision as to who she may or may not want to have that kind of relationship with. Now, at 15 years old, parents have to have a little bit more of a say. That's for sure. But at the same time, cloistering them and making them feel dirty for doing things that are just normal in teenage life and dismissing the same behaviors in boys, that's where the real problems start. And that is a huge problem in evangelical circles.
But let's see, Advanced Training Institute cult, which the Duggars were a part of, was Bill Gothard's homeschool curriculum. And he would give these seminars. And, he would give these seminars, people would go to them, and it was all about godly living and how to rule your household and how to run things and how to homeschool your kids.
Right.
And the girls were always kept on this very, very tight leash, always with the long sleeve shirts and the high necked collars and the long skirts going down to your ankles, swimming in oversized t-shirts and shorts, while boys just got to wear normal clothes. Boys always get to wear normal clothes. Have you noticed that whenever there is a religion with a prescribed mode of dress, except for ultra-Orthodox Jews, the men almost always get to wear normal clothes.
Right.
And the women always have to be covered head to toe.
But there are other restrictions that are placed on men too.
Yeah, this is true.
When I was in Bible college, I could not have hair that was below my shoulders.
Right.
I was not allowed to wear an earring. There were all kinds of restrictions that were put on us to make sure that we remained at least outwardly masculine too.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And interestingly, Gothard is single. Women are not allowed to be single unless there is a special dispensation from God. The interesting thing is that...
Wait a minute. Not allowed to be single.
Women are not allowed to be single unless there is a special dispensation from God.
So they're born married?
You are supposed to get married.
Okay.
You're supposed to get married. You are not supposed to not get married.
Does he give any kind of biblical reference or proof for this?
Oh, probably. I mean, he doesn't seem to really rely on the scriptures.
Because what I see in the Bible is God saying it's not good for a man to be alone.
Right.
Very, very different than a woman should be married.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can see from a purely misogynistic standpoint where that would get turned around too.
But see, here's the interesting thing is that for some reason, aside from the emphasis on controlling all aspects of women's physical appearance, conforming to Gothard's personal tastes was an obsession shared by women and men. Women were encouraged to keep your hair long and with curls and touchably soft.
Oh my goodness. In other words, just the way he liked them.
Right. You wonder why all the Duggar girls have that permed long hair?
Oh yeah.
It's because it's attractive to him.
Yep.
And he believes that that is the way that God wants it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's been quite a few allegations of abuse by him of girls in his little coffee clatch here.
And to be fair, a lot of religions have rules like this. I mean, you've got the absolute opposite end of the spectrum with certain Muslim sects.
Yeah.
Where the women have to wear the burqa.
Right.
There's that aspect of it too. But I always found it interesting as we were learning our way through Wicca and started learning a little bit more about Gerald Gardner and the whole business of skyclad rituals.
Yeah.
Okay. For those not in the know, skyclad just means naked.
Yep.
So you're going to, and in the Charge of the Goddess, it even says that you'll be naked in your rites, which can be interpreted a couple of different ways. But in the instance of Gerald Gardner, even our teacher at the time admitted that this was a thing that he concocted mostly because he liked the idea of just cavorting in the woods with a bunch of naked pixies.
Right. He was also into bondage, which is why the initiation ceremony for Gardnerian Wicca has basically bondage ritual.
Yep. You're bound up in a couple of different ways, and that's men and women. If you're going to be initiated into one of his degrees, then there's a bondage aspect to it regardless of whether you're male or female. But I have seen pictures of some of these rituals, and for a religion that attracts a lot of women because it's more empowering to women, there are certain things that are still pretty damn misogynistic.
Yeah.
At least if you're following any kind of Gardnerian or like kind of tradition.
Yeah, it can be. I'm sure it's changed a little since, but yeah. But women are also required to cover your hair when you go into church in the Gothard thing. You're required to do all that. And yes, you are required when you get married to have as many kids as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. And, it's like, I think the author's family had 4 kids, and that was like the smallest family in the church.
Well, you don't want your church to die of natural causes. There's got to be people to fill those pews for a long, long time.
It's like it's a moderately large church. Gee, I wonder why. Each family has at least 8 children or something. But it's a lot of energy is devoted to making sure that girls are modest, making sure that they are not showing anything or displaying anything. But you know what? If you have a body like mine, you're going to be showing something whether you want to or not. Mm-hmm. Because the boobs don't get disguised. They just get tinted. Yeah. It's just like, it just falls down, and then it's like, I'm sorry, everybody can see them. I could try binding them, but you know what?
Yeah, I was going to say, the next thing is an ace bandage. But with all due respect, it's dangerous. And if you're bigger than a C cup, it's not going to work anyway.
No, the only thing you're going to look like is like you can even it all out, but no.
I don't understand the whole androgyny aspect of this particular mindset when it's predicated on the notion of having as many babies as you can. Mm-hmm. With all due respect, does this guy know where babies come from? Yeah. And now we're not supposed to be able to see the things that we like to look at. On
unmarried girls, I guess not. Mm-hmm. Dating is also not a thing. If a guy sees a girl that he wants to date, he's supposed to go to the dad and ask him.
Yeah, and I mean, if she's in a lot of instances, if she's under 18, that answer is going to be no.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things here that seem a little bit contradictory.
Right.
Because it seems to me like in some way they're teaching girls to be afraid of their sexuality.
Right.
And then telling them, okay, well, now you have to have as much sex as you can.
Yeah.
It just makes no sense.
Yeah, it seems very unhealthy. But women were definitely under enormous pressure to marry. This person told a tale of a woman whose dad basically picked a husband out. And she didn't want to marry him at first, but then I guess they wore her down and she finally consented to get married.
Yeah, it's the whole coming to America thing. Over time, I grew to love your father.
Yeah.
It's like, a lot of cultures have that too.
A common thing is saving your first kiss for the day of your wedding.
Oh, for God's sake.
So it's like, the bride cringed, pulled back, and pushed him away.
My first kiss was at age 7. I guess I'm going directly to hell.
Directly to hell. But I'm kind of
we haven't heard anything from you. We haven't heard about any of your experiences. So,
most of my experiences with patriarchy or basically just general misogyny, I mean, it started when I was little. Most of the kids around to play with were boys. So it's like, if they're playing war, I'm the nurse in the hospital.
Right.
It's like, I don't get a gun.
Right.
They can shoot me if they want.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of a bummer.
Now,
And that's kind of harmless. But when you get to school, when you are 5 and you get to kindergarten and they ask you what you want to be when you grow up, there are 2 choices, 2 acceptable choices for women. You can be a nurse or you can be a teacher.
yeah.
That's pretty much
that's today. That's still a thing that's sort of kind of perpetuated. I mean,
Right.
we tell everybody, boys and girls, that they can be whatever they want to be, but it just the way that our education system works, and when you couple that with any kind of religious exposure or prolonged religious exposure, those are the types of thoughts that get in there anyway. They're
Yeah.
not thinking about being lawyers and doctors. They're thinking about being nurses and teachers.
Right.
Because it's so ingrained
Yeah.
in our cultural zeitgeist
Right.
that even though outwardly we say you can be whatever you want to be, and it doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl, if you want to be a lawyer, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to be an astronaut, you can do this. But how many women, there are plenty of female astronauts at this point, but prior to Challenger, how
Right.
many were there? How many did you hear of?
1, Sally Ride.
Yeah.
Everybody heard about Sally Ride.
Right. And since then, there have been plenty more.
Right.
But women are still not really encouraged very enthusiastically to aspire to things like that.
Well, at least they weren't when we were growing up. When we were growing up, it was still very, very much, you were kind of expected to have kids at some point. You had to have some sort of career that was going to let you have kids, and they were expecting you to leave, kind of. So I didn't know what to do. I fully expected to either be married and be a stay-at-home mom in the 70s.
Yeah, I think that you probably dodged a lot of it because even though it was always in the back of my mind that I was the husband, and just by definition I was the priest and head of my household.
Right.
I don't feel like I ever exerted that kind of authority. I feel like I've always looked at our marriage as a partnership.
Right, but I had a problem because I had it ingrained in my head that you were the head of the household and the priest of the home. Mm-hmm. And it was hierarchical because it was hierarchical in my head. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like an equal. That wasn't because of you. It was because of how I was trained.
Right.
In Bible
I wound up making 90% of the decisions about everything anyway.
Right.
But I don't think that I ever just walked up to you and said, we're going to do this way.
No.
There was always a discussion,
Yes.
but the final decision was always left to me. And that, I think, was just the evangelical thinking that was so ingrained. It's like whether or not you felt like you could have a say,
Right.
it still in the back of your mind was going to be my decision at the end of the day. So rather than hash it out back and forth, you would just neglect to make any kind of decision whatsoever and wait for me to decide what we were going to do.
Right.
There's a lot less of that going on around here now.
Right. But that's taken a lot of work on my part to do that.
Yeah.
Because I've had to think of myself as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that is difficult to do sometimes. But that's not because of anything you've done. It's because of a lot of things in my past.
In your past and in a lot of other women's past, too. Because remember, this is not something that the evangelicals have exacted on society. They've just perfected it.
Yes.
And that's the problem. And as long as those influences are still there, and you still have to live in a world that perpetuates a lot of those attitudes and a lot of that kind of thinking, it's really, really difficult to break free of that and accept that your partner wants you to have an equal say. And I think that's a lot of where we were at that point.
Oh, yeah.
It was difficult for you to accept the fact that you actually could have a voice, so you always deferred.
Right.
And it left me to wonder whether or not you were happy.
Yeah.
Because at that point, who knows whether or not I'm making a decision that's going to be beneficial to both of us, because I'm not getting any input from you. And that, for me, was it was frustrating.
Yeah,
A lot
can
of times I
imagine.
found it very frustrating because I could not get a straight answer out of you
Yeah.
about a lot of things. And it all goes back to it being in the back of your mind that you really shouldn't be making this decision, that it's up to him.
Yeah.
So he's going to assume his responsibility, and he is going to take care of this, or he is going to make that decision, or he is going to tell me what we're going to do about this, that, or the other. It was very frustrating because I didn't grow up in an evangelical household.
No.
I adopted evangelical Christianity when I was 13. And even though there was a lot of traditionalism going on in my house, I also didn't have the mother and father to observe.
Right.
The closest thing that I had was my grandparents. And with all due respect, by the time I knew what was what, my grandfather was long gone in his head.
Yeah.
He came back from World War II with some pretty bad PTSD.
Yeah.
And it robbed him of himself. It robbed him of his ability to be a husband and father. And that, it sparked a lot of resentment in the women in his life. My grandmother, because she found herself living with someone but not having a partner.
Yeah.
And my mother, because of the way that he was and his inability to get far enough outside of himself to show her the love that she needed.
Yeah.
There was a lot there. And there were a lot of things that I witnessed that it was scary. It was very scary. And I never got this traditional picture of what a mother and father looks like. So I never really understood what my role was supposed to be by society standards. And a lot of times I would hear things like in chapel, or that people would just say in passing when we were in school. And I would be sitting there thinking to myself, oh, please tell me you really don't believe that. Oh, they believed it.
Yeah.
They believed it.
As school progressed, I really didn't have any real guidance. That was a big problem because I did not make good decisions. I did not make good decisions career-wise because
Neither of
of
us
that,
did.
or college-wise because of that. I had a guidance counselor in high school who was anything but.
Well, most guidance counselors are pretty useless.
Oh,
I'm
but-
sorry, but they just are.
He was just, I saw him twice. I saw him once in my freshman year and once when I was getting all of my college applications.
And since
out.
I said that, just let me qualify the statement because I don't want to lose listeners who are guidance counselors. When I say that they're useless, it's not that they don't care about the job that they're doing or that they try to skirt their responsibility. It's just that what they can do is so limited that it makes them ineffective. And when you've got a guidance counselor that deals literally with hundreds of students, there's no possible way that they can get to know you well enough to be able to give you good guidance about your future.
Right. And since I made those bad decisions, and my guidance counselor at college wasn't any better.
We had guidance counselors in
We had,
college?
I don't know.
Are we talking about academic advisors?
Yeah,
Because
academic advisors.
yeah.
The academic advisor was not any better because I ended up staying for a semester longer than I really had to because they forgot, oh, gee, you came in this year. That means that you have an extra 3 credits that you need.
Yeah, and that was, they didn't catch that until it was time for you to graduate.
Yeah.
If it had been me, they would have. I'm just saying.
Right, but I'm just
they cared
buzzing
about
along.
the boys.
No, I know. And because I didn't assert myself in any way, shape, or form, because that was my style, was basically to go along to get along and never, ever, 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 ever make a fuss. Mm-hmm. I also didn't get the education I needed either.
Right.
And I was talking to you because I was in school for church music, and every time I had a piano teacher, it was different. It was a different piano teacher, and I had to start from square one. I still can't play piano.
Yeah. Yeah,
And-
that's... No, there was not a whole lot of thought
Right.
that went into anything that happened at that place. it was largely on autopilot, and they have been doing things the same way since the 50s, when they took over that
Yeah.
mental hospital that turned into a college. That
It was a military hospital.
Okay, it was a military hospital with a pretty sizable mental ward that
Well,
the last I heard had been that
they
they had left.
demolished most of
They demolished most of it, but wasn't there a building on campus that had cyanide
Oh yeah, there was
stored in it?
actually there were a series of tunnels underneath the college because it was a former military hospital,
Yeah.
and they also, of course, there were military people on base, so they had these series of tunnels connecting underground all of the things, and they found a canister
Cyanide.
of cyanide.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
I mean, it really. When I think about that, it's like, yeah, there are things on this campus that can literally kill you, physically and emotionally. And I just thought that the cyanide was a really, really good metaphor for
Yeah.
what this place was really delivering.
Yes.
It was very scary because it was, if you went all in and you believed everything that they were teaching you, especially what they were teaching you about yourself, it was pretty much emotional suicide anyway.
Right.
So that, and you didn't have to be male or female. They had different ways of manipulating you, whether you were male or female. But another thing that that's relevant to this topic is how differently they doled out discipline
Yeah.
between the boys and the girls. I think I've mentioned this on the show before, where there was at least one instance that everyone on campus was aware of, where somebody got pregnant
Yep.
and she was expelled and he graduated.
Yep. But they had to get married.
Well, that goes right back to the whole principle of the girl marrying her rapist.
Yes.
Now, some people will interpret that verse as saying, it really wasn't a matter of rape; it was just a couple of teenagers getting it on. I'm not sure precisely how you exegete that passage to mean that.
Right.
But it was the same basic principle that was at play. As long as they got married, then it at least made it okay enough for him,
Yes.
for him to go about his life. But she was really overly scrutinized to the
Yeah.
point where she was not allowed back.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of it too. These people don't read their Bibles very well, because what happened when Jesus was presented with a woman who was taken in the very act of adultery, there were positives and negatives to the outcome of this situation that I think we've gone over in another episode.
Right.
But the bottom line is that Jesus didn't let the men get away with just making accusations and not involving the man she was
Right.
with. Because and I don't read that, and some people say that there was no man because they didn't know how to interpret masturbating. They found her masturbating and decided that she was doing something dirty and unclean. No. She was getting it on with a guy who was very quietly told, okay, you just go home. We're going to deal with this. You just need to go home and forget about her.
Yeah.
And that was what happened. And that's pretty much what happened with this couple at school. They basically said, get married, and this, and then you can just go about your business and it'll be okay. So there were many examples
Yeah.
of that. There were also, I found it very interesting that they allowed men into the women's dorms. There was a common area in
Right.
all of the women's dorms,
Right.
where they could meet their boyfriends or just hang out with guys and girls at the same time within that dorm structure.
Right.
But there was nothing like that in the men's dorms.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I think that it just goes back to this 1950s notion of the gentleman caller.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
That is
it's appropriate for
Yeah.
a man to go and visit a woman, but only a woman who's worthy of a scarlet letter would come and visit a man. That's
Yeah,
why you had to
that's
stand
pretty
outside
much-
my window and yell.
Yes.
You did that a few times.
Yes, I did. So at least I didn't have to throw rocks.
Didn't you do that at least once,
I
though?
might have.
I'm pretty sure there was at least one instance where I heard pinging on my window, and it's like, oh, hello, because
Yeah,
there was
probably.
no common area. You couldn't just
Yeah,
come
I
in
couldn't
and ask somebody
right.
to get me.
Right. I had to wait.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe wait to get for somebody to come out.
Yes, it's very glass menagerie.
Yes.
With the gentlemen callers being able
Yes.
to access the women's dorms, but the women could not call on the men
Yes.
because that made them loose.
Oh, God, whatever. But it was, it was very stressful. But there was a lot of assertion of the male role
Oh,
on
definitely.
us. It was just sort of like, okay, you have to do it this way. I think that recently, it seems like recently there's been less women. Like in general, just less women pastors. Because remember, there used to be some.
There was never a huge number.
No, it was, I think it was discouraged.
It was very discouraged, but the ones that had the right personalities and were able to assert themselves and show that they had their stuff together and were able to do the job, there were enough open-minded church boards out there that would allow a female to be a youth pastor. Although in the instance of one of our mutual friends at Valley Forge, she had attempted to get a couple of positions on her own, and rather than hire her, even knowing that she was going to be doing most of the work, they were interested in hiring her and her husband and having them co-youth pastor.
Right.
Because at least this way, there's a guy involved.
Right.
Even if she did 90% of the work and he assumed the traditional wife's role in that particular setting, they still wanted him to have that title.
Right.
Because it would set a lot of people's minds at ease.
Yeah.
And there were a bunch of examples like that. But I also recall working, during my internship and the couple of years after, when we were still in New York, there were at least 2 female youth pastors right in our own section.
Yes.
And that's just one section in one state in one district.
Right. But that was in the early 90s. I wonder how many there are today.
I would love to know what the enrollment numbers are at Valley Forge.
Yeah.
At this point, and the ratio of men to women
And
that
in
are there
what
right
programs?
now. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I
don't think much has changed in that arena.
No. But if anything, I think the misogyny problem in the evangelical church has gotten worse.
Well, yeah, because now they're pushing back.
Right.
They had been able to go about their business in pretty much silence for a long time.
Right. But I think it's actually gotten worse. I think with the rise of stuff like the quiverful movement, which wasn't a thing back when we were in school.
No, and neither was purity culture, and that's another really nefarious one that's
Right.
cropped up. I think it might have been a thing, but not.
It was just beginning to be a thing.
Yeah, and again, it's some of these things were more popular in specific microcultures.
Right.
And I mean, the purity movement is its own microculture,
Right.
but it exists within certain types of evangelical churches. Now, there are a lot of evangelical churches out there that don't think that purity culture is a good thing. But the more traditionalistic they are, and I don't really want to name organizations because I don't know everything there is to know about every organization out there, but the more traditionalist ones, we're talking like the difference between, let's say, the Assemblies of God and Foursquare Gospel.
Yeah.
Or Pentecostal holiness.
Yeah.
I think that would probably be on the other end of the spectrum. You got Pentecostal holiness over here, and you got the Assemblies of God over here, and then this whole gray area right in the middle.
Right.
Well, purity culture tends to gravitate more toward the Pentecostal holiness end of things.
Right.
There have also been movements like Promise Keepers
Right.
that have given it more exposure and have made it more attractive, and maybe they tweak a few things here and there, but not by much. the whole notion behind purity culture is pretty nefarious, and that is an episode in and of itself. So I'm not going to really get a whole lot into that. But if you really want to get a good idea of what evangelical Christianity wants men to think about women, particularly their daughters,
Right.
just do a little research on purity culture. If it doesn't piss you off, then we'll take care of that in a couple of weeks.
Yes, I think that the quiverful movement just seems to be like there's a spectrum, and purity culture is over here, and quiverful is all the way over here, and it's just like a process. It seems to be a process where it's just gotten more and more conservative, or just more and more strict. The strict policing of women and their bodies.
And the notion behind some of these things where men, and again, we're going to do a whole episode on purity culture, but fathers in purity culture basically take ownership of their daughter's virginity.
Yeah.
It's like they pledge their virtue to their fathers until their wedding day. I can't even begin to tell you what kind of incestual vibe I get off of something like that.
It's just so creepy.
It's incredibly creepy, and I can't even if I was still completely drunk on the evangelical Kool-Aid, I would be looking at that and saying, "Excuse me, what the fuck?"
Yeah.
Because no, I can't take ownership of a part of my daughter's body. Okay, no, that's and especially not in that context. Especially not in the context of her sexuality. I don't want to own my daughter's sexuality.
Yeah.
Okay. The notion of that just, I mean, it can raise the flesh on my arms. It's one of the creepiest things that I've ever heard of. But there are a lot of girls out there that find security in this.
Right.
Because now they don't have to make those decisions on their own. Someone has already made the decision for them, and they've got that to fall back on. It's like, guy wants to get a little bit handy, they just show him the ring. It's like, look, I can't.
Yeah.
And that's that. It's not even a matter of her own emotions or feelings or impulses at that point. It's so far ingrained in her head that this is just something she cannot do. That, I mean, with all due respect, it wouldn't surprise me at all if her body responded to it that way too. No, you can't do this. And it would just be difficult for her even if she wanted to.
Right.
Yeah. Because, I mean, it happens with men too.
Yeah.
We've had at least a brief discussion about that with us and where my head was at when we got married.
Right.
And how it was difficult for me to go from... It was difficult for me to wrap my brain around something being a sin at 11:59 and being just hunky-dory at 12:25 when they pronounced us man and wife.
Right. It is kind of like a real mindfuck, really.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's terrible what they do to you and what they do to your self-image.
And, you know, in terms of real strict evangelical culture, they basically teach the girls that they shouldn't have a self-image.
Yeah.
That, you know, that their entire lives are going to be in service to their husbands and their families, and their self-image is projected in whether or not everyone in their family is happy and whether or not they're keeping their shit together at home.
And whether or not all of your family believe the same way they do.
Right. But the point is that their self-image doesn't come from them. It comes from what other people observe and assign as her self-image. She's not allowed to have a self-image. She's allowed to have an image, but not a self-image. Yeah. And the pressure to project a good image when you are an evangelical mother and wife, the pressure that a lot of these women are under is incredible, especially if they are married to pastors.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, I keep remembering that one church that we interviewed in New York, up in the Lake Country.
Oh, yeah.
I was around these people for three days. Wasn't it over like 3 days or overnight?
It was at least an
like,
overnight.
Oh, my God. It's like, and by the time, I think it was dinner right before we were going to go home or it was something like that. And I was like, I can't take this. I
Yeah.
will die.
Yeah, we had the boardroom tribunal and lunch or dinner the first night, and then we were there for church and I spoke.
Yeah.
That was the way that it went. But even before we got there on Sunday, it was at the hotel that night. We turned out the lights and got into bed, and I said, "Do you feel as sick about this as I do? Am I the only one who sees that there's a big problem here?" And the problem was that it was a good job.
Yeah.
It was a really, really good. It was a good opportunity because the pay was incredibly high for the time.
Yes.
Plus, we wouldn't be paying rent because they had a youth pastor's parsonage.
Yeah.
So we would have a house to live in, rent free, mortgage free, and my salary was just my salary, and it was significant. But my biggest fear at that point was that I would have been offered the job, because then what the hell do you do? How do you explain not taking something like that?
Yeah.
But I knew that we'd be driven absolutely nuts. I really have a hard time thinking that the same pastor is still there, because he was an older guy when we were.
He's probably not there anymore.
He's probably long gone from there.
I don't remember it. I don't remember anything except the last youth pastor, just because I knew him.
Mm-hmm. There were a few pastors that I encountered after Mission Impossible, where we had gone on interviews, and I just got more and more disillusioned every single time. And we talked on a previous episode about the whole thing with the ballet.
Oh, yeah.
And again, bringing it right back to a women's issue. The whole problem that she had with that was that you could see too much of the girl's body.
Right.
Well, that's just the nature of this particular art form, and it wasn't sexual in any way, shape, or form. You made it sexual by making the comments that you made, but that's not the point. That's never been part of the point. But it's just more of the same, where girls have to conform to a certain standard, and I mean, I think that modesty is definitely an important thing, but who dictates that?
Right.
It's always someone else making the decisions for her.
Right.
And that, to me, is a good bit of the reason why you and I had those issues early on in our marriage. No one had ever asked for your opinion before.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, here's this guy that I live with who wants me to make decisions about things, and what the hell am I supposed to do?
Yeah. And I don't know. It was really hard for me to think for myself. It's taken me this long. And it's really difficult when you're raised in it.
Yeah.
And when nobody really challenges you on it.
Yeah. No, that's very true. And for boys and young men, having this stuff drilled into your head from the time that you can understand has to be exponentially worse than the way that I had it. Yeah. Because at least when I heard some of this drivel coming from the pulpit in chapel, I saw it for what it was.
Right.
But it also concerned me, because it was always in the back of my head, well, isn't this something that I'm supposed to believe? Why can't I believe it?
Right.
So there's that aspect of it too.
Right. And in all of the Christian women's literature, in everything that women are told, especially in church, it's always the same, is that the man is the head of the household and the priest of the home, and he takes lead in everything. Yeah,
but you know what? Good leaders listen to their cabinet too.
Right. But you're not supposed to really, it's not important. We're not important in as much as we have kids.
Right.
It's just like, we're not that important.
And that's mirrored in the way that women are spoken to.
Right.
By pastors, by other church leaders, by people who head up programs that they want help with. I don't recall you ever being asked to do anything at church that didn't involve Sunday school or nursery.
Oh, yeah.
During services.
And I hate Sunday school, and I hate nursery. I'll be fine with little babies, okay? But once those kids start talking and walking, I don't know.
No, not other people's kids.
Not good with other people's children.
I never liked the idea of... now, I don't think I was ever, quote unquote, alone when I was doing children's ministry. I always had helpers.
Yeah,
there
you
were
always
other
have a bunch
adults
of people.
around.
Yeah.
But it always stuck in the back of my head. These are very small, very young, very fast children. And there's a lot of them. And right now, I'm responsible for all of them.
Yeah.
It's got to be the same thing in nursery.
Right.
And it can't be any easier to deal with.
No.
But the point is that those are the types of things that they ask you to do.
Right. And I'm not good at them.
Yeah.
I don't like them. But I don't get asked to do anything else.
Right. But then you add to that the fact that you were basically a pastor's wife and couldn't really say no when you were asked to do that stuff.
Because if I had a kid, I was expected to do that type of thing.
Yeah, but this happened long before Liam ever showed up.
That's true, too. Yeah,
but you were recruited for nursery a lot. During Mission Impossible, it happened. Not terribly often, but it happened.
I hated it. I hated every minute of it, too.
Yeah. But even though I didn't have a pastoral position when we went back to Faith Assembly, I was still looked at in that light, and you still kind of had to assume the pastor's wife role with this, where you agreed to pretty much anything that you could agree to doing. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of times that meant that you were in that nursery. And I'm sure it sucked.
Yeah. I don't remember doing nursery at Faith, though.
Really?
No, I don't remember it.
Oh, I do. I do.
Yeah, probably because I complained about it.
And again, it wasn't like an every week sort of thing.
No.
But I definitely remember you being in there. And when we were at the church in Belchertown,
yes,
Liam was around at that point. So there were times when you didn't see a service for weeks on end because you were back there.
Yeah, that was a lot.
And that was a small church and not a lot of kids. And it still managed to usurp a lot of your time,
right,
where you should have been getting your spiritual, quote unquote, spiritual nourishment at the same time, and you weren't for weeks and weeks on end.
But that was just fine.
Well, in retrospect, yeah. In retrospect, it was probably better.
But the thing that has impressed on me the last year or so is that you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself, but you are never taught to love yourself.
Oh, no.
Especially as girls.
No.
It's like you're supposed to look good, but you're not supposed to take pleasure in it. But they want you to look good anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But don't take pleasure in it. Don't do that.
Why don't you smile more?
Ugh.
Oh, man. And I heard that said to someone recently in a store.
Oh, yeah.
And even with the mask on her face, I could tell,
She's just like glaring.
One of the cool things about the mask, though, is that you can mouth fuck you and not say it. No one's going to know.
Yeah, right.
But I saw the look on her face. This guy, and she had obviously been having some kind of an altercation with somebody on the phone who had called her. She was not on her phone and calling this person, but she did. While there was no one at the counter, she answered her phone, and the tone of the conversation and her insistence that she could not talk right now was, you could hear it. Wherever you were in that little store, you could hear it. And this dude walks up, and after spending 5 minutes ordering scratch tickets, has the audacity to stand there and tell her, I can't see the smile on your face, but I sure can't hear it in your voice. And it's like, dude, if it's not your name on the bottom of that paycheck, it's none of your fucking business whether or not she has a smile in her voice, okay? Right. If she's doing her job and you've got your cigarettes and your lottery tickets, just get the fuck out and leave her alone.
Right.
But I could see it right there on her face when he said that. Oh my God, if she could have just tore across that counter and strangled him, she would have.
Yeah, probably. But it's the same thing. Like in the 70s, women were having to tell their bosses, my name is not sweetie. My name is not darling. And now it's like, please don't tell me to smile.
Right. Yeah, it kind of evolved a little bit, but it's just a different manifestation of the same bias.
Right, it is. And all of the same stuff still happens, except you can't make jokes about chasing the secretary around her desk anymore.
No.
But it still happens.
Well, the attitude is still there. Like I said a few episodes ago, the attitude is still there. It's just that the outward expression of it has gone underground a lot.
Right.
But we as a species, we don't change that much, and our thinking doesn't change that much. And it takes a lot to really get us to get our attention when something is really, really wrong. And recent events in our country that have sparked global outrage make this point very, very clear. There comes a point where certain things become difficult or impossible to ignore.
Right.
And I mean, when you listen to Helen Reddy singing about "I am woman, hear me roar" in numbers too big to ignore, well, that may be true. It may be numbers too big to ignore, but how many of those numbers are using their voices?
Yeah.
And how many of them are adding to the ranks of those who aren't going to put up with the things that song was speaking against?
Right.
The kind of male domination of the culture. Well, we're seeing the same thing with recent events involving race relations, police, and that sort of thing. All of a sudden, it's an issue that is getting attention.
Yeah.
And this is another one of those things where in the last couple of years, I feel like it's gotten a little bit more attention, at least in the area of abuse and sexual assault and all of that. I was always taught that if somebody says they're being victimized, you believe them until it can be proven otherwise. But then you've got situations like Tawana Brawley, who I sat behind in math class. And when those kinds of things come out and they turn out to be lies, it can set the progress back on that issue by a considerable amount.
Right.
And even though there have been plenty of cases of women coming forward about sexual abuse over the last 20 or 30 years, it wasn't until just a couple of years ago where it started getting real serious mainstream attention.
Right.
And you know what? People have been unjustly killed by cops before, but this one particular instance just sort of happened at the wrong time in history. This is 2020 and people are pissed off about everything.
Yes.
Okay? And they've got nothing but time to sit and watch the news, so they're informed. Now, there are different sources and different levels of credibility with those sources, but the basic facts of what happened there, they're pretty consistent across the board. Most issues, there comes a point where there's some kind of catalyst, and now everyone is thinking about it and talking about it. A couple of years ago, it was Me Too, and that's kind of settled down now, and you're not hearing a whole lot about women's rights, women's issues right now. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something coming down the pike that's going to spark global interest the way that the George Floyd situation has. It's coming.
Oh, yeah.
I have no doubt that this is an issue that society is going to have to deal with sooner as opposed to later. And when society starts dealing with it a little bit better, I am certain that sooner or later society is going to put its foot down about a lot of these issues that revolve around bias against women in a lot of areas, not just in terms of whether or not they're telling the truth about sexual abuses and whatnot, in pretty much every aspect of life, work, whatever. There will be something. There will be something that sparks some level of outrage or just raises enough awareness that change will come. And when that happens, all evangelical Christianity, all of these subsects of evangelical Christianity that have worked for years and years to keep women firmly under the thumb of men are going to find themselves in a real quandary. And I don't know what form this is going to take, but I do know, just based on recent history, how a lot of the things that they believe and teach and the way that it manifests can really, really be put out in front of everybody to see. Because when you've got a vast majority of people, well, I don't say a vast majority, but when you've got a large quorum of people within a certain religious group that stand wholeheartedly behind our current president, that is all I need to know about them, their religion, and their God.
Yep.
And once society starts looking a little bit more closely at women's issues and starts taking things more seriously on a global level, the same way that we're now looking at how we manage the role of the police officer in the United States, when it comes around to women's issues, it's going to send shockwaves through our culture, but it's also going to send shockwaves through a lot of major religions, not just evangelical Christianity, but they're going to bear a huge brunt of it, because the things that they've taught for years and years about women and how men are supposed to treat women, or how women are just supposed to be viewed in general, it's all going to come unraveled, and a whole lot of people are going to start getting and staying unbound. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbound. Show topics are chosen based on their timeliness, relevance, and social impact. Have suggestions for future topics? Email us at unbound.podcast.network@gmail.com with all your comments and feedback. Please don't forget to like, share, and throw a few 5-star ratings our way, and follow us on all major social platforms. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Links to our social pages, as well as a full list of cited sources in today's episode, are listed in the show notes, available at our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. If you value this resource and would like to see it continue, please consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the show description. And be sure to check for new updates every Sunday when we'll come together again and take one more step toward getting and staying unbound.